So thank you very much for joining us. My name is Lizzie and I am part of Square Pegs. I'm going to be speaking to you today about how to put happiness onto the curriculum. So I'm just going to start off by sharing my screen with you. So just give me a couple of moments. Thank you very much. So really excited to be talking to you about putting happiness on the curriculum, because this is something I am immensely passionate about. So putting happiness on the curriculum is something that I have been studying for the past 18 months, if not much longer. I historically have been working within education for around 20 years, and I have taught children from nursery all the way through to A-level. And my specialism is pastoral care of pupils. And in the latter part of my career, I was the head teacher of a special school for children with social, emotional, and mental health needs. So I really have worked with children across a multitude of needs. And what I was really focused on towards the latter part was about positive psychology. And this was something that I wanted to apply in my personal life. And I had a friend who still is a clinical psychologist. And I was really fortunate to get to spend some time with her learning about positive psychology. So let's have a look today. What is and how can we apply happiness on the curriculum? So I'm just going to spend, apologies, just one moment. I'm going to have a little look at what's happening here. So just going to go into this and have a little look. And okay, so we're going to have a look here at, first of all, looking at positive psychology. And here we have Martin Seligman, and he's a bit of a heartthrob. Martin Seligman is the director of the Positive Psychology Center at the University of Pennsylvania. So up until around the 1960s, 1970s, psychology really focused on something of a deficit model. It really focused on essentially people that were in mental distress. It looked at ill-being as opposed to well-being. And Martin Seligman and his team of psychologists said, we need to be thinking about actually putting in and paying in. And he used the analogy of a garden. And he said, actually, in our garden, we need to be thinking about what we want to grow in our garden. And if we want plants to grow, we don't simply have to start removing the weeds. We need to sow into our garden. So he started thinking about actually applying that analogy to psychology. And that's where him and his team used the analogy to build positive psychology. And positive psychology is the study of happiness, flourishing, and essentially what makes life worth living. And it aims to understand and build the strengths that enable individuals and communities to flourish. And we'll come back on to the concept of flourishing a little later. So, positive education. What is it? Positive education is where the science of positive psychology and education come together to encourage and support pupils, schools, and communities to flourish. And it's essentially a response to the gap between what people want for their children and what schools teach. So if I was to say to you, what do you want for children and what do schools teach? It would be the center of a Venn diagram between the two. Because what many people would say that they want for children is that they want happy individuals. They want their children to be confident. They want them to flourish, succeed, and be happy in life. And quite often when we consider what many schools teach, that would often lie around academia. Well, schools teach you to, get through your multiplication tests. They teach you facts. They teach you recall. And what positive education focuses on is an overlapping of those two concepts. And the last point there is around the United Nations. In 2015, the United Nations said that positive education, well-being has to be one of the core global sustainable goals. And actually, mental health and the well-being of our children is the second core priority globally, after academic attainment across schools in the entire world. So positive education, this isn't a whim. This isn't me coming on and talking about Braingym. This isn't me and looking at, oh, another bolt-on. Positive education is about the well-being of our children, and it is a combination of the science, of psychology, and best practice teaching. So, what is so positive about positive education? I'm going to give you a moment to read through. Now, the key point there that sort of speaks to me is that positive education enhances resilience. And what the pandemic has taught us is that never before have children and teachers demonstrated that core resilience. And for the many children who perhaps have not had those tools to show resilience, this is a time where we have seen that we need to support pupils, we need to support staff with having the tools to be able to dig deep within themselves to have that resilience. We know that parents need to be able to have that resilience within themselves. I know there has never been a time when, I've got 20 years of teaching experience, and I've got this, I know where to go and get a worksheet on multiplications. I know where to be able to tap into reading comprehensions. And yet, there have been many, many days where my resilience has been pushed to the absolute limit. And I think that positive education is something that I am aware has helped me to have the tools and the capacity to be able to support not only my own children, but also my family and myself to get through what's been an exceptionally challenging time. So, what I want to look at now is positive education across the globe and sort of pick out a couple of examples whereby it has been extraordinarily successful. So in Australia, there's a school called Geelong Grammar School, and they have a positive education model, which is where they have the Positive Education Centre. Now, Geelong is very, very famous for a number of reasons. Prince Charles attended their Timbertop School for 6 months back in the 1960s. Timbertops is an outdoor provision in their school, and pupils will go there for the whole of Year 9. They self-sustain in the school, and they run the Timbertop Centre. And the final celebration at the end of Timbertops in Year 9 is the pupils have to run 26 miles. It's an incredible school. School model is Timbertops. But the Geelong Grammar School is set, the fundamental philosophy there is based around positive education. And the desired outcome is that all of their pupils will flourish. And flourishing means feeling good and doing good. And they believe that the well-being there is supported by science. So I strongly recommend, if anybody has a further interest in how positive education is applied across a school, to go and do further investigation into Geelong Grammar School. They have some incredible resources and further curriculum. In Canada, Upper Canada College also follows positive education. They believe in creativity, activity, and service, which will lead their pupils to flourish. They also have an outdoor facility, which is called the Norval Outdoor School. And by the end of Year 9, all of their pupils will have done at least 15 weeks of outward bound learning. And all of their families will go and take part in their maple syrup festival. The pupils take part in the most incredible outward bound festivals, and it's all about their stewardship, because they believe at the school that their pupils are stewards of this earth's resources. So they do a huge amount of learning around environmental care. And one of their ways of responding to the pandemic, based around their understanding of positive education, is that their pupils set up their own wellbeing conference. And part of that is setting up peer support, peer podcasts, peace and well-being and so on. And lastly, I want to talk about Bhutan. Bhutan is the most phenomenally fascinating country. They don't measure the country's how the country is doing based on gross national product. They measure it on how happy their people are. So in order to assess national progress to drive policy, what they do is they measure how happy everybody is. So a few years ago, they invited Martin Seligman and his team of psychologists to come and stay and spend a few months setting up a positive education program in their schools. And they had a control group and a group of children that spent time working explicitly and implicitly on positive education. And they found at the end of the control pilot that the pupils who'd taken part in the positive education had actually made, in addition, 1 full year of academic progress. And in Bhutan, what they're going to do now is the education minister is actually going to implement the positive education program across every single school in Bhutan. And not just that, they're actually going to implement positive education training across all public sector workers. So every police officer, firefighter, postal workers, everybody across the public sector will be trained in positive education and positive psychology. So how can we add happy? There are 3 key ways that I can see we can add happy: through positive psychology interventions, vision and values, and a positive education framework. And I'm going to do a bit of a light touch with you on these 3 elements now. So this is the only time I'm going to try and sell you PPI. Hopefully I won't have to offer you any refunds in 18 months' time. So take a moment to just read through what PPIs teach. I think the most sort of commonly aware PPI that they focus on is gratitude. And most people be aware of the idea or the concept of counting 3 gratitudes at the end of the day. And also the idea of building empathy. But most of us won't be aware of the concepts of cognitive reframing or constructive negotiation. And these are such core skills, not just for pupils to start to learn, but also for adults and other members of our community, and trying to involve parents as much as we can in this process. Positive education is about our whole community being involved. It's not just about the students learning, the pupils learning. This is a community engagement. But what are positive psychology interventions? We've touched on one already in terms of counting gratitudes at the end of each day. I've included here a number of positive psychology interventions. And what's really important to note for PPIs is that all of these are scientifically proven interventions. Martin Seligman and his team at University of Pennsylvania rigorously test all of these PPIs over a period of years. And all of their research can be found at the UPenn website. So I just want to pick out 2 of these PPIs to go over, which are my favourites. And the first one is life summary. And life summary is an opportunity to just take 10 or 15 minutes to write down how you envisage your life if you lived your most fruitful, most joyful life. You're writing your biography. Just 10-15 minutes though, it's a snapshot. And assuming that, what has happened in order for you to be able to live that long and fruitful life? And then you revisit that 2 weeks later. And it's about visualizing how you've been able to achieve that long and fruitful life and what's happened in those stages to achieve that. It's almost like those positive affirmations and about keeping you focused on that positivity. And then the second PPI that I enjoy and I ascribe to is character strengths. And Martin Seligman and his team firmly believe that one of the key paths to well-being is about building on our core strengths and identifying them and talking about them and building on them, not just your own, but others. And there's the opportunity, if ever you have 10, 15 minutes, to look at the values in action survey. And I know for me, my core value is a love of learning. And that's why I take any opportunity to do more studying, to read books. I get more joy out of reading non-fiction than fiction. And I take an opportunity every day to, even for just 10 minutes, scroll through LinkedIn or Twitter. And that's where I get my defrag time. But it's about also taking that time to articulate somebody's strengths rather than giving out blanket praise, using the opportunity to challenge our unconscious bias that we might have about somebody else. So in terms of vision and values, how can we add happy? Well, we can identify, use and build those character strengths. Okay, I'm just conscious that I'm running out of time, so I'm just going to have a light touch. That positive education framework, also, there are two core meta frameworks within positive psychology. One is focusing on Martin Seligman's framework of PERMA model. The second is less commonly known in this country, which is the search model from Leah Waters. And I recommend anybody looking to implement a framework focuses on those two models. Most commonly used in this country is the PERMA model, but that's a whole separate training in itself. And in terms of schools, it's really important that we have an awareness of how to measure happy. So I'd recommend the 3 ways to measure happy is we can measure happiness, so using a Likert scale, grades of 1 to 5. Measures of unhappiness, so psychologists tend to use scales of questionnaires around depression and anxiety, and ultimately measures of academic success. Like we said in Bhutan, looking at those pupils who made at least 1 year's academic success. So in terms of the new landscape, where does positive psychology and positive education sit? We've seen the rise of the autodidact. Autonomy amongst pupils has created an intrinsic motivation. And the pandemic has reminded us that pupils are resilient and they are adaptable. They're reading around topics and they're showing that they're interested in subjects that they may not have had opportunity to look at. And with teachers, they've had this turbocharged experience. Teachers are agile, resilient and flexible, and they've been increasingly trusted to work independently. Teachers are collaborating more, and they are also much more aware of the need for pupils to have a sense of well-being, but also a need for their own well-being too. So what's next for happiness? 3 core things here. We need to reflect, we need to reconnect, and we need to recharge. And I think ultimately now, as we focus on positive education and what's next for happiness on the curriculum, before we consider the need to review and renew anything, we must take time to reconnect with ourselves, with our loved ones, and with our own community. I'm going to leave this. This is my recommended reading. I will put this out on Twitter as soon as I finish. These are the books that these are my top books. I have many, many books. I love books. And then lastly, this is a little bit about me, which I'll also put on Twitter. I want to thank you all for your time. If anyone has any questions, please do send me some tweets. And I apologise that I'm almost out of time, but I want to say a huge thank you to everybody for joining me today. On pain of death, I will finish on time. Thank you so much. Please do tweet me at PegsUK with any questions that you have, and I will answer as many as I can. I'll answer all of them, but I'll answer all of them as best that I can. Thank you so, so much for your time, everybody. Thank you.